It is a pleasure to welcome Lawton Swann, he of ClemsonSportsTalk.com, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. You can follow Lawton on Twitter at Clemson Sports. And Lawton, they say that a columnist, really becomes a columnist when they can tell their audience something that they don't want to hear. Well, congratulations. I'm sure you've done it many times before, but writing a piece yesterday on ClemsonSportsTalk.com saying, I don't think this college football thing's going to happen in 2020. I'm sure that went over well.
Yeah, it's difficult because I'm not a doom and gloom guy, gentlemen. I mean, I'm generally an optimist, but I told my listeners, because of the uncertainty that we obviously have with COVID-19, I said, look, over the summer, I'm going to reevaluate this thing monthly, and we're going to roll with that for the month. And on June 1st, looking at the things that were going on in less populated areas of our country, I thought the only schools that would have significant problems might be UCLA, might be Southern Cal, because of, just the populations of those cities. Maybe even Rutgers at that time was sort of in my mindset of a school that might have some issues from the standpoint of Power 5 programs. But as we see the trends across the country, now this obviously excludes death rates, which I know is a big argument for people, but I haven't seen anything compelling enough over the past month to make me believe that we're going to be scheduled up for football in the fall. And I certainly think that the athletic departments are beginning to recognize that. And I know that they realize they've got to play it. So there is a responsibility between the fiscal side of things and the health side of things that I think continue to really butt heads, not just in sports, but nationally. And I haven't seen enough evidence to be presenting to my audience that we'll be playing this fall. So we've reevaluated, and I think you're probably going to see it push back until the spring. And the best case scenario right now might be squeezing something in at the back end of 2020. But I do not see Clemson kicking off the college football season September the 3rd in Atlanta, because there's not an infinite amount of time and we still have too many unknowns.
Okay. Part of this to me and to David and I has always been, are kids going to be on campus? Because if kids aren't on campus, you can't justify playing football. If you're going to put kids in dormitories, explain to me you're not going to have football. So I know they're separate issues, but to us, they're kind of intertwined. When you're saying this, what do you think the odds of classes starting with kids in class and kids in dorms are come this fall?
That's a great question, because I think that you have essentially an ideal situation right now at Clemson. They came back on June the 1st. They went to begin, individual workouts and things of that nature on June the 8th. But then by June 12th, the announcement came out that Clemson had 2 cases. Then on June 19th, there were 23 cases. Then this past week, there were 14 cases. That's 39 cases with minimal student contact and interaction and small numbers of kids on the campus. If the general population of students comes back, where I think this becomes a much greater cause of concern, is that the numbers of football players who do get COVID-19 begin to escalate. And I don't think, when kids have the flu, we can expect them to play from time to time. People referenced a game between Clemson and Florida State several years ago where the Seminoles locker room was hit with the flu and they were still out there. But we know a lot more about the flu, and we're comfortable with the outcomes of what happens and how to treat the flu. There's still so many unknowns, and that's the thing for me. So if kids come back to college, I understand where you're coming from, because that's saying, hey, if those students can be on campus, why can't those kids play college football? I think at that point, it might become more so about how many kids are infected. What if your entire quarterback your quarterback room gets it? Can people play? Should we expect kids to play who are asymptomatic? Is that fine with everybody? I don't know. And quite frankly, from Clemson's numbers, there haven't been hospitalizations, and everybody focuses on the 50% that are asymptomatic. But what about the 50% that are? And with schools not reporting their numbers right now, we don't know what it looks like for anybody. So Clemson's got high enough numbers that guys like Boomer Esiason were saying, well, maybe Clemson's trying to, give herd immunity to the whole team, yet we don't really know if players can or cannot be reinfected. We haven't had any reinfections, fortunately, in the United States that have been documented yet, but we don't know what that window is, and we don't know if that's even something that's plausible or possible. So it's from that standpoint, again, the unknowns, guys, I think are the thing that are going to drive this more so than low death rates or whether or not students are on campus. The unknowns of asymptomatic, symptomatic, playing with COVID, not playing with it. I think that's what we're seeing across the country right now is that uncertainty is leading to closures, and that could ultimately be what happens to push back college football.
He's Lawton Swann of ClemsonSportsTalk.com, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. Follow him on Twitter at Clemson Sports. Lawton, are you, because this sounds more like this is your gut feeling at this moment in time, are you getting any information, any gut feeling from anyone at Clemson? I mean, is anybody whispering out of the side of their mouth some of what you're thinking and feeling? Because, you know, everything that we're seeing is that the major universities, from university presidents to ADs to conference commissioners to head coaches, they're all like, well, this is when you report. This is when kids will be on campus. And this is when the season is going to start. You know, there's no one at a major university that is saying we're not going to have kids on campus and we're not going to start in late August. And I'm just wondering, are you getting anything from someone in a position of power at Clemson?
No, not yet. And I think I don't think they can at this point because I think they have to continue to believe that they've got to push forward. I think if you present that option right now as somebody that's a power broker in college football, the backlash is going to be tremendous. So, no, not from anybody from that standpoint. But I think that the responsibility of these universities and the fact that, you know, if they knew today that they could make the same amount of money and not play the games, there is no chance they would play these games. There was no chance. What it comes down to is fiscally, they can't afford to not play these games. So they've got this balancing act that they've got to try to navigate. I don't have the answers. I wouldn't want to be Dan Radakovich. I wouldn't want to be somebody, you know, in the athletic department or in one of the conference offices that has to make this call. It was bad enough when you have to end the Atlantic Coast Conference basketball tournament and shut down March Madness. College football is the driving force behind everything you see in college athletics. And to step up and say, we're not playing is something that nobody is going to do until it's absolutely impossible to make that happen. And that window is closing. I mean, we think about the month you're going to have in July, guys, to look at August with 4 weeks until the college football season to go, you know what? We're going to be out there on the field playing. I mean, we're running out of time. And at some point, somebody's going to have to step up and say the things that need to be said, because at this point, I haven't seen a piece of evidence that would make me believe we're playing outside of low death rates. And if death rates have to be the measure for this group of individuals, of student athletes who aren't high risk, and you know, I mean, we were all kids. We were all young adults. I mean, these guys already feel like they're invincible. So now we're saying, hey, you're not in the high risk group. If the kids get back on campus, man, numbers across the country, in my opinion, will skyrocket. And then ultimately, you know, what about older coaches? Frank Solich is 75. You got coaches and coordinators on staffs that are older. I mean, those guys are in the high-risk group. You got coaches like James Franklin who are having to self-isolate because he's got a daughter with sickle cell anemia. You got Dave Clawson at Wake Forest who's going to isolate from his wife, Catherine, for the entire year because she's a cancer survivor. I mean, these are things that are happening right now just so that they can get back out on the field. I cannot see it happening unless something changes significantly between the last day in June and the first day in August. And so far, the way 2000 is going, or 2020 is going, I don't know that we're going to see anything that'll present enough evidence for me to change my mind.
You know, Lawton, and I keep bringing up the students, but that to me is the biggest part of this. You talk about the money in college football, and there is no doubt. David and I have said this for a while. The entire university system depends on kids being on campus. These 2 days seem to be going with one another. You know, I've not heard of any schools saying they're delaying their start. But from a financial model, I do know for a fact, because I was with a a professor at Rutgers over the weekend who's my wife's best friend and said they're already hearing about deferments and people not coming back in the fall and freshmen not starting. Are you hearing any of those things in Clemson? Because that's also a part of the economic model. If we don't have dorm rooms and we don't have cafeterias and all the other people, I mean, you know that it's the biggest business in Clemson, South Carolina is Clemson. And all of the other businesses that go around that, if kids aren't there, I mean, it shuts down cities.
Yeah, in Clemson specifically. I mean, when your town is named after the college or your college is named after the town, whichever way you want to look at it, I mean, it's a big issue. And, you know, there certainly have been those conversations in this state with folks at South Carolina. You know, those have had to be happening, you know, for educators across the country right now because there's so much potential virtual learning that'll be taking place. And, you know, thank goodness we are in an era where we have that as an option to be able to keep some of those doors open for people to receive their education. But, you know, I think it will be a compelling argument for playing if students are on campuses, you know, in large numbers in the fall. But at this point, I know my niece is a student at Clemson. Everything still seems to be very much up in the air. They've got plans in place. Lots of people have put plans in place for, you know, the different phases of getting back to, I guess, quote unquote, normal. But right now, I don't think when we look at those numbers nationally, how quickly things are beginning to rise in terms of the infection rates, you know, you look at that by comparison to what those numbers looked like a month ago. I think if the hospitals continue to gain more and more, or I guess technically lose more and more beds, but gain more and more people, you know, in the numbers that we're seeing, I think you start to impact the health system again. And that's not just a college football thing at that point. I mean, that becomes a national issue again that I think we all thought, and I think rightfully so, based on what we were hearing at the time, was we were doing pretty okay. You know, we had a couple of hot spots in New York and other areas, and everybody else was fine, you know. But now, you know, and I talked to people at MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina, and they're like, look, our beds are full. And I go, oh, well, okay, well, all right, well, where do we go from there? You know, if the things don't start to calm down in our country with COVID-19 over the next month, projecting that there's a college football season in 2020 is very difficult, in my opinion.
Lawton, final question for me, and it's a personal one. You mentioned your niece. Is she planning on being on campus at Clemson?
You know, she hasn't told me what her plans are. I was actually on the phone with her for just a little bit yesterday, and she was saying, she, just like every other, you know, teenager, she's tired of having the social distance and all that, but she's very, you know, keenly aware of what's going on because some of her friends have tested positive for COVID-19. So, you know, she's like, I don't want to have to deal with that. But from that standpoint, you know, I don't think that, you know, while that demographic isn't high risk, there's a tipping point, I think, just from coast to coast that could still keep college football from taking place. And I can't imagine what it would sound like if we just said, hey, you know what, we're running these college athletes out there no matter what, even in the all new image use and likeness era where they are going to, at some point down the line, eventually be able to be compensated. You know, I know that's not taking place to that degree at this point, but wouldn't that be ironic that for all these years, right when they get that type of benefit given to them, we're then going, hey, in the midst of a health crisis, you know what, we could really use some entertainment for you guys. I would keep my eye on the NBA. They are in an isolated situation. See what happens there. I would keep my eye on Major League Baseball. But from where I sit today, there hasn't really been anything compelling enough to imagine that if college students are on campuses, that there wouldn't be enough health issues in terms of kids being symptomatic with COVID-19 that are on football teams across the country to even keep things up and running for an entire year. You'd probably end up shutting it down. I think your best case scenario is to push it back. And if you have to push it back to 2021 and kick it off in January, go for it and try to make your money then. But until we know more about COVID-19, which seems to be morphing every single day, I think the unknowns continue to outweigh the knowns, and that's a big problem for athletic directors trying to get out on the field because it is health versus finances, and anybody that's putting finances over health, is going to probably be, essentially shot down by the masses when that time, when push comes to shove.
He's Lawton Swann. You can find what he wrote yesterday at ClemsonSportsTalk.com, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. College football unlikely to take place in 2020. You can follow Lawton on Twitter at Clemson Sports. Lawton, appreciate you making time for us, particularly at this hour. All the best, and we may revisit this between now and, kickoff of the season, whenever that takes place.
Guys, I hope so. I'm typically an optimist, but I haven't seen anything compelling enough to tell me that they'll be playing football September the 3rd. I can tell you that.
Lawton, I'm just going to tell you right now, your inbox is going to be full of a lot of hating type of emails. Save the two or three best ones. Save the 2 or 3 best ones, and 3 or 4 years from now, read them and laugh hysterically. I think it's great therapy.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Lawton Swann, kind enough to join us. Mark, I got 2 texts during this interview. 2 texts. The first one, wow, another smart sports guy. All right, that was the first one. Second text I got, okay, as long as we have idiots in this country like this guy, okay, we are never going to move on. All right. Those are the 2 texts I got. They were right on top of one another.
Yep. Well, most of the people inside our Twitch chat room saying they disagree with him. Look it. I don't know, but this weekend, as I mentioned, my wife's best friend's a professor at Rutgers. What she was telling me and what she's hearing about people coming back to campus was alarming from a financial standpoint for that university. It's nothing to do with sports and the online stuff. She happens to teach equine nutrition to a vet school there. So the people there have to be hands-on. But as you said, David, when you start going all virtual, again, tell me why you're not going to Southwest New Hampshire State or whatever the hell it is.
Well, right, because Southern New Hampshire University is a hell of a lot cheaper than Rutgers.
You're damn right it is.
So
when my son called me to tell me his summer accounting class was learn on your own, literally, he emailed the professor and said, there's no virtual classes. He's supposed to watch videos and take his toughest accounting class to get into the business school. And he said to me, Dad, I'm dropping it. I said, I hope so. Because I said, what the hell am I paying for? For you to teach yourself? $1,000 for one class for you to teach yourself? Are you out of your mind?